At precisely 8:13 a.m. on the 15th of August, 1943, Technical Sergeant John Mackenzie hunched in the deep shadow beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobodura airfield, New Guinea. His eyes were fixed on the pilot climbing into the cockpit. This was Lieutenant Roy Hayes, 23 years old, 6 combat sorties to his name, 0 confirmed kills. Intelligence had come in at first light. A flight of 18 Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighters was hunting the morning patrol corridor. Hayes was flying straight into their teeth. Mackenzie had serviced P-38 for 8 brutal months. He knew the aircraft like his own heartbeat. The twin Allison engines, the distinctive tail boom design, a marvel of engineering that gave it devastating speed in a straight line and dominance at high altitude. But every man on the line knew the Lightning's grim, open secret. In a close-quarters dogfight, it couldn't outturn a Zero, not even close. The enemy fighter was a ballet dancer made of silk and razor blades lighter, infinitely more agile. It could complete a full combat turn in nearly half the time it took the heavier P-38. In the swirling chaos of an aerial engagement, that fractional difference wasn't a disadvantage, it was a death sentence. U.S. doctrine was brutally clear. Never turn with a Zero. Use your superior speed and altitude. Dive, strike, disengage, hit and run. Hayes had followed the manual to the letter on 5 previous missions. It had earned him nothing but near misses and a growing pit of dread in his stomach. The Zeros were cunning. They lured the Americans into turning fights, sliced inside their wider arc, settled onto their tails, and filled the sky with cannon fire. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 Lightnings in just the past month and a half, most of them in turning engagements they were never supposed to enter. Mackenzie had seen too many young faces vanish from the mess tent. Boys who joked with him at dawn were missing by lunch, listed as failed to return. The official reports, the debriefings, they all pointed to pilot error. A failure of discipline, a break from doctrine. But Mackenzie, with grease perpetually etched into his knuckles, knew the truth was more mechanical, more insidious. The problem wasn't the pilot's hands. It was in the cables their hands commanded. The P-38's aileron control cables ran a complex route through the long tail booms, a labyrinth of pulleys and guides connecting the pilot's stick to the great flaps on the wings. The system, by design and factory tolerance, had slack. A tiny amount, perhaps 3/8 of an inch at full control deflection. At cruising speed, it was negligible. But in the heart-stopping, low-speed strain of a maximum performance turn, that slack translated into a deadly lag. A half-second delay between the pilot's desperate command and the aircraft's roll response. In a fight where victory was measured in feet and degrees, that lag was a death warrant. 2 months prior, Mackenzie had timidly mentioned his observations to the squadron engineering officer. The lieutenant had dismissed him with a wave. The cables were within specified tolerance. Altering them would violate the manufacturer's warranty, and modification of flight controls required authorization from Lockheed, an ocean and a continent away in Burbank, California. The manual was the manual. So, in the quiet darkness of the previous night, Mackenzie had chosen to break it. Using a salvaged length of high-tensile piano wire from a wrecked trainer, he'd fashioned a crude Z-shaped tensioner. In 8 minutes, working by flashlight in the cramped confines of Lieutenant Hayes's left boom, he'd installed it on the aileron cable. It added a mere 0.4 of a pound of tension, eliminating the fatal slack entirely. It was a court-martial offense. The morning inspection crew, focused on fuel loads and ammunition belts, hadn't noticed a thing. Now, Mackenzie watched in silent, gut-churning tension as Hayes's Lightning taxied, roared down the strip, and lifted into the bleached morning sky, bound for a rendezvous with 18 of the Empire's finest. Whatever happened in the next hour would haunt Mackenzie forever as a criminal, or as the man who gave Roy Hayes a fighting chance. Mackenzie's conviction was forged in the loss of men he'd known. The first was Lieutenant David Chen, out of Sacramento, a cheerful kid who talked about his family's restaurant. On July 9th, Chen had returned from a patrol over the Solomon Sea with 3 neat bullet holes stitched into his left boom. Shaken, he described a Zero that had effortlessly matched his turn. "I pushed the stick hard, Mac," Chen had said, wiping sweat from his brow. But the bird felt sleepy, like it was thinking about it. That delay, it almost got me. The bullet holes were a tight grouping, the sign of a perfect deflection shot. The Japanese pilot had led Chen's aircraft with uncanny precision, as if he knew exactly where it would be a half-second later. Chen was lucky that day. His wingman saved him. 3 weeks later, flying a different P-38 over Rabaul, Chen wasn't lucky. The report said the same thing. Caught in a turning fight, couldn't roll out in time. Then there was Captain William Moose Morrison, an ace with 11 kills, a veteran who knew the Lightning's limits. On August 3rd, his flight tangled with Zeros over Oro Bay. Morrison took one down on his first pass. On his second, 2 Zeros reversed on him. The radio intercepts played in Mackenzie's mind for days afterward. Morrison's calm, then strained voice. Controls feel mushy, not responding. His wingman saw it too, Morrison's aircraft seeming to wallow, struggling to answer his commands. They shot him down at 4,000 feet. His crew chief, a Texan named Rodriguez, tore the wreckage apart afterward. Every measurement, every cable tension, was within the manual's specifications. The official finding, pilot error. Rodriguez didn't buy it. Neither did Mackenzie. The airplane had been in spec, and, in spec, had gotten a good man killed. As Lieutenant Hayes's P-38 dwindled to a speck in the vast Pacific sky, John Mackenzie was left alone with his secret and his terror. He had just sent a pilot into a furball against overwhelming odds, in an aircraft he had illegally modified. Whether his makeshift fix would give Hayes an edge, or become the cause of a catastrophic failure, was a question now being answered in the deadly geometry of combat, 15,000 feet above the jungle. And back on the ground, the first whispers of suspicion about Morrison's crash were beginning to circulate, threatening to point directly at the one man who knew the real, mechanical truth. By the middle of August, the weight of 17 lost pilots pressed down on Technical Sergeant John Mackenzie like the equatorial humidity. Some were friends, others were just young faces glimpsed during a pre-flight walk-around, but he had touched all their aircraft. His signature was in their maintenance logs, a cursive promise they were ready. He had stood on the same cracked coral and watched each one lift into a sky from which not all returned. The survivors came back with the same unsettling story. She's heavy on the stick in a hard turn. Feels like she's thinking it over. A subtle lag. Most pilots accepted it as a quirk of the big fighter, but Mackenzie knew in his marrow it was a flaw. He'd felt that faint, sickening slip of slack in the control cables. He could diagnose it by ear. A properly tensioned cable gave a clean, high-pitched twang. A loose one, even one within spec, emitted a dull, deadly thud. Every P-38 on the line sang the same flat note. After Captain Morrison's report was filed, Mackenzie shared his discovery with Rodriguez. The Texan's face was grave. "If you know what's wrong, Mac, there's gotta be a fix." "There is," Mackenzie replied, his voice low. "But it ain't in any manual. It's the kind of fix that gets a man a court-martial." The pilots knew the doctrine. It was drummed into them. Never turn with a zero. Use your speed. Boom and zoom. The theory was pristine, logical, and utterly divorced from the chaotic reality of the South Pacific skies. Combat was a fluid, desperate scramble where the enemy wrote the rules. Lieutenant Roy Hayes was proof of the doctrine's failure. The farm kid from Iowa wasn't a poor pilot. He was an obedient one. For 2 months and 6 missions, he had followed the book. On his third sortie, he'd executed a perfect high-side attack, diving out of the sun. He had a zero framed in his sight, and then it simply evaporated, snap rolling away. Hayes commanded his P-38 to follow. The response was a sluggish, weary roll. By the time his nose came around, the sky was empty. His fourth mission was a lesson in vulnerability. Jumping a pair of zeros, his initial burst missed. As he rolled to re-engage, his wingman's frantic shout warned of 2 more diving from above. Hayes wrenched the stick. The lightning obeyed, but with a fatal lethargy. That half-second delay allowed a stream of 20mm shells to stitch a line of violent dimples along his right tail boom. He fled, his confidence shattered. The 5th mission stole his last shred of peace. It took his wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Parker. In the fight over Finchhafen, Parker was separated. 2 zeros found him. Over the radio, Hayes heard Parker's desperate, rising panic. "She won't turn. She won't turn fast enough." Then came the staccato rasp of cannon fire, a scream, and silence. The official report stated the cause as pilot error. The aircraft was listed as mechanically sound. The manual's acceptable slack had, once again, delivered a perfect, bureaucratic death sentence. For Mackenzie, the war had a specific smell, a cocktail of avgas, scorched metal, and hydraulic fluid. It was the scent of impending combat, and each morning it filled his nostrils as he sent more men to fight in machines he knew were flawed. On the evening of August 16th, that guilt found a voice. Roy Hayes appeared in the maintenance bay, his face aged by fear. "Sergeant," he began, his voice low, "is there anything at all you can do to make her roll faster? I don't care what the book says. I just need a chance." Mackenzie looked at him and didn't see an officer. He saw a scared kid who could already visualize his own name on a casualty report. He saw the ghost of Thomas Parker. He nodded slowly. "Come back at first light, Lieutenant. I'll see what I can do." That night, Mackenzie worked alone. The vast hangar was a cathedral of shadows. He opened the inspection panel on the left boom of Hayes's P-38, the metal still warm. Reaching in, he grasped the aileron control cable and pulled. There it was, the enemy. 3/8 of an inch of lifeless, lethal play. His tool was a 6-inch length of high-tensile piano wire, scavenged from a written-off lightning. He'd pocketed it weeks ago. Now, he realized, he'd been saving it for this moment. With the stolen piano wire in his greasy hand and the memory of 17 dead men at his back, Mackenzie began to bend the stiff metal into a shape that defied every regulation he had ever sworn to uphold. 100 miles to the north, 18 Mitsubishi Zeros were being prepared for dawn, their pilots confident in their mastery of the sky. And in a quiet hangar in Dobodura, a single sergeant, operating far beyond his authority, was preparing an answer they would never see coming. He had kept the piece of piano wire in his tool bag for weeks. Now, sitting on the cool, oil-stained concrete, Mackenzie understood why. The 6-inch length of stubborn, high-carbon steel was his only weapon. The pliers felt clumsy in his aching hands. He bent the wire, fighting its spring-tempered resistance. His grip slipped, and the sharp end gouged a cut across his thumb. Blood welled. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept bending, the metallic scrunch loud in the quiet. It took 8 minutes to achieve the precise, sharp angles. This crude Z would act as a tensioner, taking up the deadly slack. Installing it was a battle. The interior of the P-38's left tail boom was a cramped tunnel. Mackenzie wedged his shoulder against a structural rib, the edge biting. With one hand, he aimed a heavy flashlight. With the other, he worked blind by feel. His target was the clevis pin connecting the aileron cable. His greasy, bloody fingers fumbled. The clevis slipped from his grasp. He heard the tiny ping as it hit something inside the boom and vanished. A cold wave of panic washed over him. He spent 5 agonizing minutes probing blindly. The thought of discovery played in his mind. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison. But then he saw Roy Hayes's desperate face. He felt the ghost of Thomas Parker's scream. His fingers closed over the lost pin. The rest was grim determination. He fitted the Z-shaped wire between the cable end and the pulley. Reconnecting the cable was a fight. The new tension made the alignment tight. He pressed his full weight against the pliers to force the clevis pin through. Finally, with a solid click, it seated. He pulled the cable. There was no slack, none. He moved the aileron on the wing outside, and it responded with instant, crisp obedience. It was perfect. It was also a felony. He closed the inspection panel, gathered his tools, wiped his blood away, and walked out at 1:15. The tropical night was heavy and still. In the far distance, he heard the rhythmic murmur of aircraft engines, likely a Japanese night reconnaissance plane. The sound tightened his stomach. He had just fundamentally altered a warplane. If his modification failed, Hayes would die. But if it worked, Hayes might live. Sleep was impossible. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn. At 6:30, he was on the flight line. He watched the ground crew fuel and arm Hayes's Lightning. He watched Hayes, pale but focused, walk from the briefing hut. Their eyes met. Mackenzie gave a barely perceptible nod. Hayes's jaw tightened. At 7:42, the twin Allisons bellowed to life, and the aircraft sped down the strip and lifted into the pale sky. All Mackenzie could do now was wait. The engagement commenced at 8:14 over the Huon Gulf. Hayes's flight, at 13,000 feet with the sun at their backs, spotted the enemy below, 9 zeros. Hayes, following his leader down in a steep dive, picked the trailing zero. He mashed the trigger. The P-38 shuddered with its combined battery. Tracers laced the sky. The Japanese pilot snap-rolled right and dove. Reacting, Hayes commanded his own roll to follow. That's when he felt it. The aircraft responded not with its usual reluctance, but with an immediate, eager snap. There was no lag. The stick moved, and the lightning rolled. It was a sensation so alien, it momentarily short-circuited his training. He completed a 90-degree bank in half the time, his nose slicing down to find the fleeing zero perfectly framed. He fired. The rounds walked with brutal precision up the enemy fuselage. The zero did not simply smoke, it disintegrated. Hayes' first kill. The Triumph was crushed by his wingman's warning. Zeros, high at 10 o'clock. 3 more were diving on him. Doctrine screamed to climb away, but physics argued otherwise. They would catch him. His only chance was to fight. He ignored the manual. He wrenched the stick hard left and pulled. The P-38 pivoted with the ferocity of a striking hawk. The lead zero pilot, expecting predictable slowness, was caught off guard. Hayes saw the surprise. He fired. His round severed the zero's left wing. The aircraft spun away. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The remaining 2 zeros tried to scissor. Hayes stayed with them. Every reversal, his lightning matched instantly. There was no fighting the controls. It was an extension of his nervous system. 1 zero pilot panicked, reversing too hard. Hayes sliced inside his turn. At point-blank range, he fired. The zero vanished in a flash. 3 kills. The 4th enemy broke and fled. Hayes, his fuel low, did not pursue. He climbed, found his wingman, and turned for home. The entire combat had lasted 7 minutes. As Hayes' P-38 turned for Dobodura, its pilot was forever changed. But on the ground, the man who made it possible was engulfed in private torment, unaware of the victory. And high above the Huon Gulf, another pair of American eyes had witnessed the impossible agility of Hayes' plane. Captain Frank Mitchell, a veteran squadron leader, had seen it move in ways that defied all understanding. The secret of the piano wire was safe no longer, and the questions were already forming in the mind of a man who had the rank to demand answers Mackenzie could not afford to give. When Hayes' P-38, Iowa Kid, touched down at Dobodura at 9:03, John Mackenzie was a statue on the flight line. The engines whined down, the canopy slid back, and Hayes emerged, his hands trembling. He dropped to the ground and walked straight to the sergeant. Their eyes locked. Hayes leaned close, his voice a hoarse whisper. It worked, but the secret was already escaping. 6 other American pilots, orbiting as high cover, had witnessed the fight. Among them was Captain Frank Mitchell. From his vantage, Hayes' lightning had rolled and reversed with impossible speed. Mitchell knew Hayes was competent, not an ace. The difference was the machine. After landing, Mitchell cornered Hayes in the debriefing shack. "What was different out there, Lieutenant?" Hayes shook his head, a wild grin breaking through. "I don't know, sir. She just listened." "Did maintenance do something?" Mitchell pressed. Hayes' grin faded. "You'd have to ask Sergeant Mackenzie, sir." 2 hours later, Mitchell found Mackenzie in the sweltering maintenance bay. "Sergeant," Mitchell said, "what did you do to Lieutenant Hayes' aircraft?" Mackenzie wiped his hands slowly on a rag. He saw no deception in Mitchell's eyes, only the sharp look of a commander who had sent too many men to their graves. Mackenzie took a breath and told him everything. Mitchell listened in absolute silence. His first question was simple. "Can you do it to mine?" "Sir, you understand the risk? It's not approved. If it fails—" "I've lost 4 pilots in a month, Sergeant," Mitchell cut in, his voice flat. "If there's a chance, I'll take it." That evening, Mackenzie performed the same illicit surgery on Mitchell's fighter. The next morning, Mitchell returned with a revelation. He sought out his wingman. "It's like flying a different airplane," he said, a fervor in his voice. "Talk to Mackenzie." By August 20th, Mackenzie had installed 9 of the makeshift tensioners. Knowledge spread through pilot gossip and mechanic shop talk. It was a contagion of hope. Some crew chiefs, fearful of regulations, refused. Others, men who had hauled broken aircraft from the jungle, understood. Mackenzie showed them. 6 inches of piano wire, a Z-bend. 8 minutes. The proof was in the combat tallies. Hayes scored 2 more kills on the 22nd. Mitchell bagged 3 on the 25th. Pilots who had struggled for months were suddenly effective. In July, the ratio stood at a grim 2 P-38 seconds lost for every 0 destroyed. By August, it had narrowed. As September dawned, the numbers neared parity. On the ground, a quiet conspiracy operated. The engineering officer, Captain Holloway, sensed a change but found no paperwork. During inspections, cable tensions mysteriously checked within spec. He didn't know the enlisted men had a drill. Remove the tensioner before inspection, reinstall it after. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, the officers did not. Then, the enemy noticed. Japanese operational reports began noting anomalies. American P-38 seconds were maneuvering with uncharacteristic aggression. They were rolling faster, reversing with a crispness that disrupted Imperial Navy tactics. On September 3rd, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, an ace with over 60 victories, engaged a lightning. His signature move was to bait an American into a turn, then instantly reverse, slicing inside the P-38's wider arc. It was arithmetic. This time, the arithmetic was wrong. As Sakai reversed, the American matched him. The P-38's nose snapped around with a speed that stole Sakai's advantage. Only his sublime instinct saved him. He returned to Rabaul deeply unsettled. Other veteran pilots filed similar, confused reports. The Americans weren't flying new tactics. Their aircraft were simply responding faster. A fraction of a second. In a dogfight, it was a lifetime. Japanese intelligence scoured wreckage. They found no new engines, no secret weapons. They never found the 6-inch piece of piano wire. They were looking for an engineering revolution. They missed the maintenance hack. The psychological blow was profound. The Zero's legendary agility had been a tactical certainty. That certainty was now crumbling. Veteran pilots grew hesitant. The unseen edge planted a seed of doubt as deadly as any cannon shell. The Japanese attempted to adapt. Some units abandoned the turning fight, trying to adopt hit-and-run tactics. But to fight like a P-38 was to surrender the Zero's greatest strength. Others became over-aggressive, pressing attacks to suicidal ranges. They died quickly. The fundamental problem was that they were battling a ghost. They knew a change had occurred, but could not see it, name it, or counter it. As the tide of aerial combat turned, the very success of Mackenzie's fix was weaving a net around him. In California, Lockheed engineers, reviewing strange field reports, were beginning to ask pointed questions. And at Dobodura, Captain Holloway's suspicions were crystallizing into a formal investigation. The piano wire had given the Americans an edge, but it had also drawn a line straight back to the exhausted sergeant, a line military justice was now preparing to follow. The end of September 1943 delivered a stark verdict. In brutal aerial combat, the Japanese 11th Air Fleet lost 38 fighters to P-38s. American losses stood at 22. For the first time, the ratio had flipped. The Lightning was now killing the Zero at a rate of nearly 1.5 to 1. Imperial Japanese Navy squadrons received an unthinkable order: avoid engaging P-38 without decisive numerical advantage. The hunter had become the hunted. The fulcrum of this change was a piece of contraband piano wire. Its discovery by the brass was an accident. In October, an inspector noticed inconsistencies in cable tension logs. His factual report created a dilemma up the chain of command. Here was a flagrant violation. It was also undeniably saving lives. For 3 weeks, lawyers and commanders debated, court-martial the rule breakers or sanction their ingenuity. In November, a Lockheed engineering team arrived from Burbank to investigate the anomalous field reports. They examined the modification, tested it, and ran the numbers. Their conclusion was a quiet vindication. The fix was not only safe, but optimal. It corrected a design oversight. By December, a refined, factory-produced version was being installed on new P-38J models. The fix was officially canonized, but its origin story was redacted. The Lockheed history credited ongoing engineering analysis. The name of Technical Sergeant John Mackenzie appeared in no report. His contribution was absorbed into the impersonal machinery of progress. The men he saved carried the story. Roy Hayes completed 63 missions, tallying 11 kills. He returned to Iowa, raised a family, and worked as a crop duster. Every August 17th, he placed a call to California. "John, it's Roy. Just calling to say thank you." Frank Mitchell rose to squadron commander, finished the war with 16 victories, and retired as a colonel. To every maintenance officer under his command, he recounted the tale of the piano wire, insisting the best solutions came from the grease-stained hands of enlisted men. Mackenzie mustered out in 1946. He opened Mac's Garage in Long Beach in 1948 and worked there for 42 years. He rarely spoke of the war. When pressed, he'd shrug. "I was a mechanic, fixed airplanes." In 1991, a historian found cryptic references to field expedient cable tensioners in New Guinea. His research led him to a retired mechanic in Long Beach. John Mackenzie was 73. He confirmed the findings simply. "Wasn't anything special. Something needed doing, so we did it." The historian later estimated the act may have saved between 80 and 100 pilots. Mackenzie dismissed the number. He didn't count lives saved. He remembered the men who came back. For him, that was the only ledger that mattered. John Mac Mackenzie passed away in 2006 at 88. His obituary noted his service as an Army Air Force mechanic. It did not mention piano wire. His garage still stands. In the back office, on a wall, hangs a single, faded photograph. It shows a young man in oil-smeared coveralls, squinting against the Pacific sun, his hand resting on the sleek fuselage of a P-38 Lightning. On the back, in faint pencil, it reads, "Dobodura, August 43. This is how true innovation often unfolds in war, not in well-lit halls of planning, but in the desperate, quiet moments of those who operate the machines. It is born from sergeants who feel a fatal flaw with their own hands, who see a solution in scavenged parts, and who possess the courage to act without permission. Their names may not be etched on plaques, but their legacy is written in the cleared skies and the quiet, full lives of the men who came home."